I hope you guys have been enjoying this series so far. It's always good to learn about more people, learn about the saints who have come before us, and to see how they lived their lives, how God saved them. It's a really cool thing. Hopefully, you're enjoying it as much as we have been teaching it so far. It has been fun, but tonight is a very fun one because we are talking about Jonathan Edwards. Is anyone familiar with the name Jonathan Edwards? Anyone ever heard? Okay, all right. We got a couple of people who are familiar with Jonathan Edwards. Well, hopefully by the end of this, you're all raising your hands. Otherwise, I have done a terrible job. But Jonathan Edwards is who we're talking about today. Jonathan Edwards, here's a nice picture of him. He was born in 1703. He is born in America, one of the only saint that we are looking at who is born and bred in America, though he would have considered himself British. He was in the colonies. This is 1703. If you remember 1776, we're just a little over now, 250 years old and a few days. So it doesn't go back that far, but he was born in Connecticut to a mother and father. He was the only son of 11 kids. So he grew up with 10 sisters. So you can imagine the kind of fun that he had growing up. I don't remember where he was in that order. I don't think he was the oldest or youngest. Pretty sure he was somewhere in the middle. Odds are he was in the middle, but yeah, he grew up that way, and his father was a pastor as well. His father was a preacher. That was his profession, and so he grew up hearing the gospel. He grew up going to church constantly. He grew up around the church, grew up with people coming over to their house constantly after church, all of those things. He was legitimately a pastor's kid in every sense of the word, but he was not a Christian until a little bit later in life. He was born 1703, and then at the age of 13, at the age of 13, he goes off to a place called Yale College, which we now know as Yale University, but back then it was just Yale College. And so he goes there and he goes to study. He is an incredibly bright student, surpasses everyone else, graduates essentially valedictorian. They didn't really do that back then, but he would have been valedictorian. Top of his class, super bright guy. In the middle of one of his years at school, though, he gets really, really sick. So sick to the point where he thinks, this is probably how I'm going to die. I'm probably going to die of this illness because medicine back then was not super great. So most of the time it's like, oh, you have a fever? You're probably going to die. So that's how he feels, and that's what he thinks. And as a pastor's kid, as someone who grew up in the church, he starts to realize, oh man, if I am going to die, I got to deal with my mortality. What's going to happen when I die? Because I know I have not repented. I know I have not put my faith in Jesus Christ. So what's going to go on? And so he takes this long introspection, looks in at the state of his soul, and knows, I'm not okay with God. He does actually get better, and that's not the end of the story right there. That would be quick. But he improves, he gets better, and 2 years later, he finally says, okay, I need to, based on what happened back then, I knew if I were to die, I'm going to hell, and I deserve it. But I know that there's a way that I can not have to do that. It's the gospel. It's I put my trust in Jesus, and I'm going to live for him now. I'm going to do what he wants with my life. And so 2 years after that event, he puts his trust in Jesus. He becomes a Christian. He becomes a believer. At the age of 18, he does this. And at 18, he goes off to start ministering at a church. It goes somewhat well. He's there for a little while. And then in 1728, I think it is. Oh, I'm sorry. He said this, I will do whatsoever I think to be most to God's glory and my own good profit and pleasure. This is one thing that he was very much known for. Two things, God's glory and our good. If you've ever heard that phrase before or something like that phrase, he's pretty much the guy who coined it. He's the one who kind of came up with that idea. Yes, everything should be for God's glory, and it's going to be good for me. So that's what I want to do. That's how I want to live my life. And so he dedicated himself to that end very, very strongly. I don't know what you guys are doing at this age group, but this was me at this age group. This was my college group, so these are all our small group guys. You'll notice Jeremiah Talato right there. That's a fun one. All of these different pictures are from the college group. This was us at a conference called Resolved. That'll come up a little bit later. But yeah, some family, different things. Also, if you remember Krista Wortherman, that's her right there. We didn't even know that for years until she came here. And then we were like, wait a minute, we took a picture with Mary Poppins. And she was like, yep, that was me. It's crazy how God does things. But this is what I was doing at your guys' age, 18 to 21 roughly, which is when Jonathan Edwards became a Christian at 18, and he decided, his words, as he said, I will do whatsoever I think to be most to God's glory and my own good. I'm going to profit and I'm going to pleasure. If I do what God says to do, I'm going to take him at his word that it is the best plan. Even if it leads through, just as David said, the valley of the shadow of death, even if it leads to hardship, it leads to difficulty, if it's God's plan, it's going to be best for me, and I'm going to enjoy it the most. So why wouldn't I live that way? That is what he decided to do at that age, the age that you guys find yourselves in, the young adult age. He did something that was very important, that was very foundational to the rest of his life. At the age of 18, he starts to write down what later became known as his resolutions. 70 statements that he said, I'm going to live by this. And he said, I'm so focused on this. I want to do this so badly that what I'm going to do is every day, I'm going to look back at some of these and I'm going to think through, hey, did I do that? Did I accomplish this? Did I do what I said I was going to do? At the end of every week, I'm going to look at a bigger chunk and say, okay, how did I do in these areas? Is there something I need to improve? Is there something I need to address? And at the end of every month, he said, I will go through every single one of these items and make sure I lived by what I said I would live by, because I want to live for God's glory, which is ultimately going to be my good. If I enjoy God the most, that's going to be good for me. So he set out to do that. Jonathan Edwards was an incredibly humble man as well, because this is the very start of his resolutions. Before he even started writing any statements of, this is how I want to live, this is what he wrote. He said, being sensible that I am unable to do anything without God's help, I do humbly entreat him by his grace to enable me to keep these resolutions so far as they are agreeable to his will for Christ's sake. So he starts out, before he says anything, before he says my plan, what I want to do, he goes to God and says, God, I can't do this. I want to do this great thing for you, and I am unable to do it. I'm incapable of doing it without you. So God, please help me. If it's anything that you want me to do, give me the power, give me the motivation, give me the mindset, give me whatever I need to accomplish your will. And then he writes down these statements. Again, there are 70 of them. We can't go through all of them. You see, it's a big list there. You can get these. You search it on Google. You can have it in moments. But just wanted to highlight some of the things that he said at your age group. Constantly remember that. This is at your age as a young adult. He said, this is how I'm going to live my life. Number 4, he said, resolved never to do any manner of thing, whether in soul or body, less or more, but what tends to the glory of God, nor be nor suffer it if I can avoid it. It was very flowery language. Basically what he's saying is, I never want to do anything, or I guess the opposite of that. The only thing I ever want to do is what tends to glorify God, what will end up giving God glory in everything that I do. Whether I eat, whether I sleep, whether I drink, whether I do whatever, I want every single element of my life pointed towards God's glory. This is his fourth resolved statement. He said, I'm resolved. I'm going to do it by God's power for God's glory. Can you imagine if you took on this resolved statement? If you said, every single thing that I do, I want to do for God's glory, and I'm going to think about it every night before I hit the pillow. Before I go to bed, I'm going to think through, man, what did I do today that was for my glory? What did I do today that wasn't for God's glory? It didn't point people to see how great Christ was. It didn't point to myself to think of how great God is. What if you took on that kind of statement and said, I'm going to do this by God's power for his glory? Some more. He said, resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if I expected it would not be above an hour before I should hear the last trump. He says, if Jesus were to return an hour from now, is this what I would want to be doing? If I knew for a fact Jesus is coming back in 1 hour, I've got 1 hour left of life. He says he has another resolved statement, which is very similar, that speaks about his death. If I was 1 hour away from my death, would I spend the time to do this thing? You know how much that will save you from? You know how many meaningless things that's going to turn you away from? If you were to think, man, if I had 1 hour left, would I spend it doing this? Or would I spend it doing something more worthwhile? Would I spend it enjoying the family that God gave me? Would I spend it diving into his word? Would I spend it in prayer? Would I spend it sharing the gospel with that person? If we had 1 hour left and then I knew I was gone, never had that opportunity again, what would I do? That's how he said, I'm going to live my life. How many times do you hear about old people when they get to the end of their life, they get on their deathbed, and what do they have? A bunch of issues and problems, and they think, oh man, if only I had done this. I regret so much. I wish I would have said that. I wish I would have done that. I wish, Jonathan Edwards was like, I don't want that. I want to get to the end of my life and be like Paul, who says, hey, I ran my race. I did it. I kept the faith. I did it well. We're not perfect, and he's got other resolves about what to do with sin, but he's like, I want to live my life this way because that's a life worth living. That's a life that's going to actually give me joy because that's what God says. If it's God's plan, it is good, and it's good for me, so that's how I'm going to live. He said, resolved that I will live so as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Again, making sure that he wants to live with no regrets. People will throw that around today, and they will usually say it in like a YOLO. Does anyone even say YOLO anymore? What's the new phrase that people use for that? You only live once, and so I'm just going to live it to the max. I'm going to go crazy and do whatever I want. Jonathan Edwards would say, yeah, you only live once. So you should live it up. And the way to live it up is to obey God. The way to live it up is to glorify him because that is the greatest good you can do. That's the most meaningful thing you can do. That's the most good thing you can do. It will bring you the most joy if you live the way you were made to live. That's what he taught. Another one, the very last one that he wrote, just on his own speech, let there be something of benevolence in all that I speak. Man, can you imagine that, going through to the end of the day and thinking, was there something kind that I said every time I spoke up? Was there something that was good and uplifting and helpful, beneficial to the people that I was around? Or was I just kind of saying stuff? I was saying whatever I wanted, throwing things around. These are good, helpful things to think about and look at in your life. A couple more here. Resolved, whenever I do any conspicuously evil action, he knew I'm going to sin. I'm going to fall short. I cannot live perfectly. So he said, whenever I know I've done something wrong, I want to trace it back till I come to the original cause. What is it that's in my heart? What desire is it that's in my soul that has grabbed a hold of it and has me doing this? Where did that come from? Was it a selfishness? Was it a greed? Was I wanting to tear someone else down? What was it? that came from. And once he found that original cause, he says, and then both carefully endeavor to do so no more. Well, obviously, I don't want to sin anymore, turning away from that, rejecting it, abandoning it, and to fight and pray with all my might against the original of it. Do you want to know how to put sin to death in your life? This is the way to do it. When you sin, when you catch yourself and you see, ooh, I did something wrong there. I did what I should not do. I said something I shouldn't have said. I crossed that line that I know I should not cross. You sit back and say, okay, I gotta do some searching in my heart. Where did that come from? What desire am I trying to fulfill? I had to do this with one of my kids yesterday. One of my kids, sadly, was just having a rough sinner's life. And they were in trouble for something, and one of their other siblings was walking by, and they decided to just kick their legs, and so that other sibling fell down on the floor. And it was just an immediate, nope, not okay. You're getting disciplined. Go to the other room. So deal with the discipline and everything. And then afterwards, we talked about it and tried to essentially do this exact thing. Started to ask them, why did you do that? What did you think it was going to fulfill? Were you angry at them and you're trying to get back at them? Were you just in pain and you wanted to cause pain in others? What is it that was saying you should make them hurt? You should make them fearful. You should make them scared, whatever it was. And tried to drill down and get to what's in your heart. What's down in the deepest, darkest recesses. Let's root that out, and we are going to fight and pray against the original of it. That is how you root out sin. You get down to the roots, and you get it out. Jonathan Edwards was all about doing that from your age. Resolves, I think this is the last one. Whenever my feelings begin to appear in the least out of order, when I am conscious of the least uneasiness within or the least irregularity without, I will then subject myself to the strictest examination. Some of them he has specific dates on it, which I'm sure in his mind was like, remember what happened, learn from the mistake. It's happened apparently twice within a week. It was within 9 days in 1723. When he realized, ooh, I made a mistake here. I should have caught on to that. Really, all this is saying is whenever I start to feel a certain way, if I'm starting to lash out at people, I'm starting to snap at people, if I'm starting to worry and grow anxious, or if I'm starting to just get frustrated all the time, that's irregular. That's not right. So I got to stop, again, take stock, reflect. Okay, what's going on? Why am I feeling that way? Is it, I just need a snack? Sometimes you just need a snack and a nap. It helped Elijah. It'll help you too. But guess what? It's also sometimes, a lot of the time, how's your daily Bible reading been? Have you been in God's Word lately? Oh, well, then I understand why you're worried, why you're not focused on Him. Have you been praying? I understand why you're getting frustrated and angry because things seem like they're not going your way because you're not submitting your way to Him. I get why that's happening. And so he decided, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen with me. And if I see it happening, I'm going to catch it and I'm going to deal with it because this is the right way to do it. These are his resolve statements. Reminds me of this passage, 2 Chronicles 16:9. Says, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward Him. This, I hope, is a verse that could be about every single one of the young adults here at our church. As God is searching, this is a prophet talking to the king who has messed up and done wrong, and they were looking for support elsewhere, and the prophet's like, dude, you didn't get it. You could have just gone to God. You could have just done things His way and He would help you. But you tried to do it your own way and it didn't work, did it? He says, the eyes of the Lord looking to and fro over the whole earth. Just constantly, God's like, is anyone going to obey me? Is anyone going to follow me? Is anyone going to do what I'm telling them to do? And then when He finds someone, He gives them strong support. Man, how beautiful is that? How good is that? To have the strong support of God. to know that he is there saying, yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to help you through this. It may not go exactly the way you planned. It's going the way I planned. It may not be exactly the end that you wanted, but it's what I wanted. And I'm going to support you through it. I'm going to help you through it. I'm going to guide you, do everything you need so you can walk through that valley of the shadow of death, and you're going to be okay. I'm going to provide a bountiful feast for you in front of your enemies, in their presence, as David says. This is a great verse to meditate on, memorize, to think about constantly. Man, if I would just be one of those people that God is looking at, saying, yeah, you're doing what I told you to do. I'm here. I'm going to support you like a loving father. He's there. That is what Jonathan Edwards lived his life like. And you can imagine if he started that at your age, what do you think the rest of his life was like? I think maybe a term fruitful might pop in your head, hopefully. Probably he's going to be pretty fruitful. Let's look at it. Let's see what happens with his life through the rest of his young adult years. So he gets saved at 18, finishes off at Yale pretty soon after, and then he moves. He is helping out, doing some ministry in one area. But then Yale calls him back, and they were like, hey, man, kind of like Augustine, you're so good at this. Can you please come back and tutor our people? So in 1724 to 1726, he comes back to Yale as a tutor. And back then, this wasn't just an academic school. This was essentially a seminary. It's what most colleges started out as, major colleges at the time, again, the colonies in the U.S. now. They all started out as Christian, biblical centers of learning. And so he came and he's helping to teach other people who hopefully will become pastors. And he is only, if you check the math here, 21 to 23 years old at this time. And yet he is there teaching the next generation. He's there showing them, hey, this is what God says. This is how to live. Reminds me of what Paul says of Timothy. Hey, don't let anyone look down on your youth. Set an example. You got things to do. After that, in 1727, so he's 24 years old now, he gets married. He meets Sarah Pierpont, who is an amazing gal. And if you ever have time, read about her. She did so much. Truly, he could not have done as much as he did without her help by any means. They end up also having 11 children, so big families all around. But he gets married, and the same year he starts to work at a church there in Northampton, Massachusetts. He is ordained as a minister. They have an old pastor who is there, and he is, can't remember if he's 80 or in his 80s, but he's old for, especially back in the 1700s. He is very old, and they know he's going soon. So they ask him, hey, can you please come on? Can you please start essentially kind of taking over some responsibilities, and then once this guy dies, then you can be installed. It's actually very similar to Augustine. So he comes in, he starts doing that, which, by the way, the pastor of that church is actually Sarah's grandfather. So this is Jonathan Edwards' grandfather-in-law, I guess you could probably say in that way. It is his wife's grandfather who's the pastor, and then he comes on as the second pastor. And then 2 years later, 1729, that grandfather dies, and so he becomes the pastor of the Northampton church. He takes over for them. Next major things that start to happen are in the late 1730s and early 1750s. I have to give you a little background on this, but maybe you've heard of a thing called the Great Awakening. Has anyone ever heard of the Great Awakening? Maybe familiar, maybe in school, maybe a little bit, maybe you've heard it before. The Great Awakening, what happened was originally the people that came over on the Mayflower in 1620, they were all Puritans. They were all people who said, hey, the Church of England and definitely the Roman Catholic Church, they've got it way wrong. We just want to stick to what God says. What does God's word say? We just want to be able to worship him. So we're going to come over here. We're going to do all these things. So they come over here in 1620. And they are all about God, and they're very serious. They said, we want to worship God the way that we want to worship, the way that God says to worship him, and not have to deal with all the rulers, and it depends on which king is in charge. That's the way that the government, that's the way that the Church of England is going to go. If there's a Protestant ruler, great. If there's another ruler that hops on the throne, then it's bad for us again. So we're done with that. We're going to go over here. So that's what they do. They come over to America. Now, in the 110, 120-ish years after they come over, more and more people start coming over. These are the American colonies. There's so much that you can do there. They also send over some of their riffraff and all the fun people from England. And so you start getting a lot more people who are not as devoted as the Puritans. A lot of people who are kind of like, yeah, I know there's a God. Yeah, I know we should pray. Yeah, I know the whole Bible thing, and I heard about Jesus. Okay, whatever. And so you get an entire generation, really, that comes up knowing about God. So, yeah, we're going to show up to church on Sunday because that's what good people do. We're going to come and we're going to talk about prayer. We're going to talk about God because that's what good people do. But then I'm going to go live my life however I want to live. And what was really popular then was deism. Deism is this idea that God basically made everything. So great, God, thanks for making the world. And then God was like, okay, peace out, I'm out. And he leaves. And so now we're just kind of here doing our own thing. God kind of gave us the world and was like, there you go, see ya. And so we can do whatever we want. We can live however we want. It's fun and interesting, and maybe we'll learn some morals by going to church. It's probably good to have our kids grow up in church so that they learn morals and, all the classic stories. And back then it was like, yeah, if I want my kids to read, I got to send them to church because that's where they're going to learn how to read. That's where they got the books to be able to read. So yeah, there you go. So really what it became was just a full-on cultural Christianity. We go to church because we know it's what we're supposed to do. We go to church because we'll feel bad if we don't. And that's really what Jonathan Edwards is now preaching in at this time. That's what his church is. That's what most of the American colonies are all dealing with at that time, is deism. There's another man named George Whitefield. Don't have time to go into him, but he's another great guy that you can read. It's really Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards who really start the Great Awakening. And really what it is it was an awakening. It was a bunch of people who were just sleeping, they're closing their eyes. Maybe you can even picture in your mind they're at church on Sunday, and they're just closing their eyes. Oh, great, nap time. There we go. All right, wake me up when he's done. When I hear the organ playing, that's when I know to open my eyes again. And they just don't care. So what Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards do, especially Jonathan Edwards, who is a man who says, no, I'm going to live for God's glory. And people don't get it. You guys are living your lives thinking that you're enjoying things. You're living your lives thinking that this is good for you, that you're going to have a good end, that God's happy with you just showing up to church on Sundays. That's not okay. And so he starts to preach against this as well as George Whitefield. He even invites George Whitefield over in 1740 to preach at his church in Northampton. But what happens later on is he gives a very famous sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Maybe you've heard that before. I remember actually in public school, when I was in high school, we read this. We learned all about the Great Awakening. We learned all about, I remember hearing the name Jonathan Edwards. I was not a Christian at the time, so I was just like everyone else, like, this guy, what is this guy all about? Man, he must have had a rough day, or he woke up on the wrong side of the bed or something, but he just seems so upset. Sinners in the hands of an angry God? Chill out, man. Now I get it. So he preaches this sermon. He didn't title it this. It became known as that afterwards. But I'm going to read portions of this sermon to you. What he wanted to do is truly wake up his congregation. Show them, hey, the way you're living is not acceptable, it's not okay, and there are dire consequences. So this is a portion, a little excerpt of what he said. Also, before I start reading it, sorry, I'm going to take it away because you're going to start reading it. As he read this, What a lot of people will look at, they will look at Jonathan Edwards and they'll be like, oh man, he's one of those fire and brimstone guys. He's one of those guys that starts yelling in your face, you're a sinner and you're going to hell, and blah. Those guys on, the corner and everything. Jonathan Edwards was actually very soft-spoken, and he was very calm. It was one of the things that people actually really loved about him, and probably why a lot of people could sleep during his sermons, is because he would not raise his voice. He would just talk normally the entire time as he's explaining things, but the things that he was saying were very strong. So he said this, "O sinner, consider the fearful danger you are in. It is a great furnace of wrath, a wide and bottomless pit full of the fire of wrath that you are held over in the hand of that God whose wrath is provoked and incensed as much as against you as against many of the damned in hell. You hang by a slender thread with the flames of divine wrath flashing about it and ready every moment to singe it and burn it asunder, and you have no interest in any mediator, and nothing to lay hold of to save yourself, nothing to keep off the flames of wrath, nothing of your own, nothing that you ever have done, nothing that you can do to induce God to spare you one moment." That's strong. And he preached this to his church. I'm sorry, not to his church. It's actually in Enfield, Connecticut that he preaches this. To a church in Enfield, Connecticut. So he was traveling around at the time. That's what they kind of used to do every once in a while. But he's in Enfield, Connecticut, and he preaches this sermon. And the people there are like, wait a minute. Me? You're talking about me going to hell? That's me? I thought God was good with me. I thought I just had to show up to church on Sundays. What do you mean that I'm going to hell and he hates me just as much as he hates all the damned in hell? What? This is crazy. Again, he had to explain to them the dire situation that they're in. Again, a lot of people will say that he was a fire and brimstone teacher and just he loved yelling at people, getting in their faces. Listen to some of the other things that he said. "And now you have an extraordinary opportunity, a day wherein Christ has thrown the door of mercy wide open." Yeah, that sounds like fire and brimstone, guys. "And stands in calling and crying with a loud voice to poor sinners. A day wherein many as are flocking to him and pressing into the kingdom of God. Many are daily coming from the west, east, west, north, and south. Many that are very lately in the same miserable condition that you are in are now in a happy state, with their hearts filled with love to him who has loved them and washed them from their sins in his own blood, and rejoicing in hope of the glory of God. You have cause to mourn for sorrow of heart and howl for vexation of spirit. How can you rest one moment in such a condition?" Challenged the people, said, God's there. The offer of salvation stands. He's out there. He's yelling. He's calling. Hey, come to me. All who are heavy laden, all who are weary, come to me. I'll give you rest. I've got the solution right here. But you got to come to him. How can you sit there and not go to him? That's what he preached to the people. One of the guys who was there, he was another pastor, minister in the area, and he was at this sermon. He heard this sermon preached, and so he wrote these things about it. Also, this is the exact way that he wrote it, so I didn't have a seizure as I was writing this. This is actually what it says. "We went over to Enfield, where we met dear Mr. Edwards, of Northampton, Massachusetts, who preached a most awakening sermon from Deuteronomy 32:35. And before sermon was done, there was a great moaning and crying through your whole house." He was writing this in a diary to God, basically. "What shall I do to be saved? Oh, I am going to hell. What shall I do for Christ?" etc., etc. So that your minister was obliged to desist. Ye shrieks and cries were piercing and amazing. So in the middle of the sermon, Jonathan Edwards has to stop and be like, hey guys, you got to stop making noise. You got to stop freaking out. That's not the solution. Just yelling and being so upset, that's not how it gets fixed. It gets fixed by putting your faith in Jesus Christ and what he's done, turning from your sin. He continued and he said, after some time of waiting, the congregation were still, so that a prayer was made by Mr. W., one of the other men who was there. And after that, we descended from the pulpit and discoursed with the people, some in one place and some in another, and amazing and astonishing your power of God was seen. And several souls were hopefully wrought upon that night. And oh, your cheerfulness and pleasantness of their countenances that received comfort. Oh, that God would strengthen and confirm. We sung a hymn and prayed and dismissed the assembly. That's what he wrote, recounting the events of that day. So after the sermon, all the ministers who were there, the pastors, they all spread out into different areas. Hey, if you want to go talk to someone, you can go over there, you can go over here, you can go over here. They all spread out. And many people came to Christ that day. But a lot of people say that this is the start of the Great Awakening, where this started all over I keep wanting to say nation. It's not a nation at this point. All over the colonies, all over the states and the surrounding states, all over Massachusetts and Connecticut, all of these places where all of a sudden so many people are literally awakening to the idea of, oh, wait a minute, it's me. I'm the sinner. I deserve hell. I'm not good with God with all the stuff that I did. This is what he preached, and so many others did as well. But he was one of the ones who started it. This is where it was preached, just in an old church building in Enfield, Connecticut. This is just a rendering of what it probably looked like. I think it had already been destroyed by the time that this went up. But if you ever are in Enfield, Massachusetts, you can go look for this stone. It's a nice little stone that they have as a monument that says, hey, in 1741, Jonathan Edwards preached this sermon that started the Great Awakening. And it's all there on that stone, that little plaque that you can go and look at. What Jonathan Edwards lived his life for was to be a servant to God, because he knew, if I live for God's glory, it is the greatest good I can do, and ultimately it's going to bring me joy. It's a great verse that he probably thought on many, many times and looked forward to. He wrote prolifically on eternal life and heaven and what that was going to be like. But Matthew 25:21, talking about the parable of the talents, says, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. That hopefully is something that you can take as well as a young adult, to be constantly thinking, man, I want to hear that. How much am I truly living for that right now? How much am I truly, how resolved am I ultimately to live in such a way that I get to hear that at the end of my life? I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. That's what I want to hear. So I'm going to work hard. I'm going to go at it. I'm going to do everything that I can to live for him. And again, Jonathan Edwards was not a superhuman. He was not some amazing tier A, rank S Christian. He was just a normal man. He was a normal young adult, just like you guys. He would have been sitting here just with you. He was smart, sure. But that's really it. In his preaching, wasn't phenomenal in his presentation of it. People didn't flock to him like they flocked to some other people who were much better orators, but he spoke the truth because he was dedicated to it. He knew, I got to say what God says. That's how he's going to save people. So after the Great Awakening, what happens a little bit later on in life, in 1750, this is 9 years after he preaches the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, he actually gets voted out of his church. It is a church model where the congregation can say, none of us like you, so you're out. We're hiring someone else instead. And so he was voted out. One of the reasons that they gave for that was because when they would take communion, if you're familiar with communion, God is very passionate about communion because it represents the death of his son. And so even to the Corinthians, as Paul writes, he says, hey, some of you guys, you're taking communion improperly. And because of that, some of you are sick and some of you are dead. God has killed some of you guys because you're not taking communion the right way. That's pretty strong. Jonathan Edwards took that and he said, hey, if you're not living a life that's commensurate with the gospel, I don't want you to take communion. That would probably be a little awkward Sunday morning, because as the food's all being dispersed, or probably it was more like a Roman Catholic thing where they would come up and they would get it from the fronts and then they would go back and sit down. As they would come up, he'd be like, no, I don't think so. You're not getting this because you're not taking part in what God has done. You're clearly not repenting of your sin. You're clearly not doing these things. And people seemed to not like that for some reason. But it was very similar, I felt like, to what Paul did with Euodia and Syntyche. If you remember in Philippians, as he calls these two ladies out in the middle of a letter to the entire church that's to be read in front of everyone. And he's like, yeah, guys, I'm doing good. Everyone's good. Awesome. Hey, Euodia and Syntyche, you guys get it together. And, keep serving God with joy. So they voted him out of the church. They do not want him to be the pastor anymore, and he is gone. What he does instead is he moves to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. He had a friend, David Brainerd. David Brainerd was a missionary who had been a missionary in, I want to say it was Massachusetts, may have been Connecticut. But he's there as a missionary to the Indians in that area, Native Americans, indigenous peoples, I don't know which one it is. But he had been ministering to them and teaching them, trying to translate stuff for them, trying to teach them all these things. And he had actually visited their house many times. He came and stayed with them when he had tuberculosis. He ends up contracting tuberculosis in his ministry that he's doing. This is David Brainerd, not Jonathan Edwards. And so Jonathan Edwards says, hey, you're super sick and you need a place to stay, because he didn't have an actual house. He said, hey, come live with us and we will take care of you. So he is being nursed by Jonathan Edwards' daughter. They actually kind of fall in love, and it seems like they may get married, but it's tuberculosis back then, and so that's done. So he dies, and then she catches it because she was nursing him back to health, and then she dies 4 months later after that. A lot of death in these times. So he saw that ministry that David was doing, and he was like, man, I think that's a good ministry. I think that's worthwhile. I think it brings glory to God. Let's go teach. Let's go essentially evangelize even more than we were before. So he goes to do that in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. He does that in one of the buildings that's similar to this. This is where he was preaching at. They've done a lot of renovations since then, but this was technically some of the same stones that he preached in, and it is still there today. You can go visit it. Thought I'd just throw that in there for you. This is when he writes most of his books. He wrote extensively, tons of books. This is when he writes most of them. But then in 1758, what happens is he gets a letter from one of his other daughters who was already married. They were living in New Jersey. She writes to him and she says, hey, Mom and Dad, my husband just died, and I've got all of our kids. Could you come help, please? And so Jonathan Edwards is like, oh man, yeah, of course. So he sends his wife and says, yeah, I want you to go down there. And he's struggling with, should I go down there? Should I help out? We've got a lot of work that we're doing right now at the church, but maybe I should go, maybe I shouldn't. He's praying through it, wrestling through it. And I think it's 2 days later, he receives a letter from the College of New Jersey that says, hey, her husband who died, he was our president of the college. Now we have no president. Would you please come be the president of our college? And so Jonathan Edwards is like, okay, well, I was already thinking about going there, and now I'm being offered a job over there. It seems like maybe I should go. So he accepts. 1758, he becomes the president of the College of New Jersey. Does anyone know what we call the College of New Jersey nowadays? Maybe this helps a little bit. This is the coat of arms of Princeton University. Jonathan Edwards was the second president of Princeton University, what we call Princeton, what back then was known as the College of New Jersey. All of these old colleges, these mostly Ivy League colleges, they all began as religious institutions to train up more pastors, to train up more people in the church. And so he went and he was going to do this work. That's why even their coat of arms has a Bible. It's not just a book, it's a Bible. And it says vet, which means old, nov, which is like the word novel or new. So we've got old and new, and then you read it across. Testamentus. Testamentus. Old and new, testamentus. The entire school is founded upon the Old and New Testament. And so that's one of the things that it was supposed to be. Sadly, at this time, he gets over there in 1758. Doesn't have a lot of time there because immediately he gets an inoculation for smallpox, because there was a lot of stuff going around then. And he ends up contracting smallpox, a really bad version of it, and he ends up actually dying later that year. I want to say it's June or July, I can't remember. But he dies in 1758 at a relatively young age. He was 55 at the time. It was quite sad, but he left quite a legacy. First of all, there's a lot of things that he said that we still hang on to today. Like I said, the God's glory and our good, that's very much him. Another quote that you probably have heard before that you didn't know was his: "You contribute nothing to your salvation except the sin that made it necessary." If you've heard that before, or some phrasing of that, that was Jonathan Edwards. It didn't come up with the idea, God came up with the idea, but he put the words to it. He was the one who said that initially. God is the highest good of the reasonable creature. The best thing that you can do is live your life for God and his glory. That is the best thing that you can do. The enjoyment of him is our proper. It's what we're made to do, to enjoy him, and is the only happiness with which our souls can be satisfied. He knew, if I just live for God, I will be satisfied. I will find enjoyment. Yes, there's going to be heartache. Yes, there's going to be danger. Yes, there's going to be difficulties, but I will be satisfied in him. We will never be of much use in this life until we've developed a healthy obsession for the next. Great, great quotes from this man who loved God and that God used in incredible ways. Some other things that are left along in his legacy: he wrote 37 books, really the 37 volumes. These are giant, long books. Some of them really familiar. His most popular, most famous one, rather, is Religious Affections, just talking about how our desires should be for God and how our carnal desires, our fleshly desires, point us in the wrong direction and they never satisfy us. But if we put our affections on God, we will be satisfied, just like that quote earlier, I think is actually from that book. Charity and Its Fruits, Distinguishing Marks, all of these different books. Forgot that was the next one, sorry. But one of my favorite, closest to my heart, if you saw that real quick, part of his legacy is that it's part of my testimony. Because I had grown up in church. I had thought, I'm a good church kid. I serve in church. I've been serving in church since 6th grade. I was serving. I knew the ins and outs. I knew all the Bible stories. I did Awana. I memorized all these verses. I know every book of the Bible. I can say it faster than you. Sword drills, you have no chance. I will get there first. I know all of it. I had all the knowledge, all of this stuff. And so I was very puffed up in pride. And yet one year, I went to a thing called the Resolved Conference. I think you heard me say that earlier in one of those pictures. And so I went to the Resolved Conference, which was a conference based on Jonathan Edwards' 70 Resolved Statements. They had a lot of famous people there, like John Piper, John MacArthur, C.J. Mahaney was there, Al Mohler was there one year. All of the big theological people of our day and age, and they all preached. And it was at that conference, well, as a result of that conference, that later on I finally realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm the sinner. I had to hear it just the way that Jonathan Edwards preached it. As it took all of these big guys an entire weekend, 11 sermons in one weekend, to finally break through to me. Oh, I deserve that. I should be in fear of God. And so because of that, I got saved. And so that is a part of my history. That's a part of my salvation. My testimony is all based on what God had done. And yes, that was Pastor Elliott who baptized me long time ago now. If you want to see all the fun pictures, you can ask me later. But that's part of my testimony, and it's awesome to now get to see and look at people who get baptized now. And they say, yeah, it was because of your faithful ministry. And I can look back and say, well, I got saved because of Jonathan Edwards' faithful ministry. And Jonathan Edwards looked back and probably said it was the faithful ministry of my father and people before him. It goes all the way back to Jesus because men and women have been faithful to the message of the gospel. Men and women have stood up and said, I'm going to live my life dedicated to him. And that is how people continue to get saved. That is how God has brought so much glory and honor. There's no greater way than when someone stands up and says, I've been saved from my sins. I've been freed from my slavery, and now I am with Christ. It's a great, wonderful thing. What do we see from him very quickly, just to summarize? He got serious early. At your age, he got serious and said, I'm going to live this way. I'm not going to mess around. I'm not going to see and wait and check. Well, maybe the world has something to offer. Maybe I'll hold on to some of these things. Nope, I'm just going to be serious right now. Why would I hold back from the joys that God has for me? That's all I would be doing. Trading in the happiness that God has for me for what? This fake, cheap imitation? My kids have fake money. Would you ever trade that for real money? No. How foolish that would be. He said, I want to get serious early. You can see that in his 70 resolutions. Another thing that he did was he was focused on being happified, which is a word that he made up, but he liked to use the word. Focused on being happified in serving God, to be made happy. He said, if I serve God, I'm going to be made happy. It's going to be for my joy. We Christians, we like making up words. It's good. Paul did it. It's fine. He stood for truth boldly when no one else wanted to hear it, when no one else was interested. He said, no, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it in love. And he made a lasting legacy. So with that, we're going to switch over, get into small groups for a little bit, and then enjoy the rest of our nights. But I hope that you guys see and remember, this was not some superhuman. This was not some just way better guy. No, this was just a regular human who said, at your age, I am devoted to living for God. And look at how God used him. And he can use you guys in the same ways. Not in the exact same way, although if you became a pastor and did all those things, great. But he can use you in just as big of ways in whatever area of life he has you go into. So with that, let me pray real quick, and then we'll get into small groups. God, we thank you so much for the faithful life of Jonathan Edwards. God, I can't help but think of what Hebrews says, that we are truly surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And God, we see so many of them in the Bible, but God, also just in church history, we see so many men and women stand up for you and dedicate their lives to serving you. And God, when we do that, if we do that, you will give strong support to those people as you just look and see who's going to obey me, who's going to do what I'm saying. And God, you love to use your people for great and glorious things. So I pray that we too would live lives that are devoted to you. We would take our sin seriously, putting it to death. We would take our evangelism seriously, going out and standing up for you and for truth, sharing the gospel with as many as possible, because God, who knows? You might save them, even if it seems like a no. God, you can, and you do love to save people. So, God, we look forward to seeing what you will do in the lives of the young adults of our church as they decide to resolve and be serious about their life, be serious about their sanctification. And God, ultimately, I'm excited to see just what we saw this entire last year studying, the joy of God when we serve you. God, I pray that every single one of them, as they truly do taste and see that you are good in every aspect, as they cling to you, as they obey you, as they put sin to death, it can be hard, it can be difficult, but God, they will be made happified in you because you are good. And one day you will hear that wonderful thing, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master. Please let us work towards that end today and for the rest of our lives. We pray that in your name. Amen.